Financial, with a focus on the clean tech sector. National Bank has been proud to partner with Intergen on its Clean Tech Breakfast series. And as Kyle mentioned, this is the third installment of the series. So we've been excited to present the innovative companies driving real change and innovative climate solutions through these calls. National Bank is driven equally by its support of entrepreneurs, but also its desire to aid companies that are helping decarbonize industries. Today's presenting company is Pure Life Carbon, and joining us today is Gordon Anderson, a director of the company. Gordon is the co-founder of CastX Ventures, a Calgary-based venture capital firm that is focused on early-stage life science companies, of which Pure Life Carbon is one of those investments. Gordon is also a co-founder of Indigenous Wealth Financing, which structures partnerships between corporate Canada and Indigenous communities. Gordon brings a wealth of experience with over 30 years of financial services experience, including time as president of Citadel, a trust company, and held senior roles in a multitude of different areas, both at CIBC and RBC, focusing on areas such as strategy, operations, governance, sales. And it's actually a numerous list, so I'm going to leave it at that, and Gordon can expand if he'd like. And then he serves on a number of boards, both profit and nonprofit. So thank you, Gordon, for taking your time to join us today.
Thanks, Christina.
And Adam, we'll hand it over to you to make the other speaker introduction.
All right, fantastic. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Adam Kirkby. I work for a company called Innovate Calgary. In a sentence, we are the tech transfer office for the University of Calgary, but our business has become a lot more than that in the recent years and has been dedicated to a lot of ecosystem support, including the establishment of startup spaces and hubs. The one that I work with is the Energy Transition Center, which is led in partnership with our corporate partner, Avatar Innovations. And the idea is that we surround new startups and provide them with space and mentorship in a system where they can get access to the resources they need. As an industry partnership manager, my role is essentially to connect industry research questions to research and facilities at the University of Calgary. Now, with that said, I'd like to welcome Jon Horsman to this meeting. Jon is the Chief Financial and Administrative Officer of Pure Life Carbon. He has over 20 years of experience in executive and senior roles at ATB Financial. Highlights include leading ATB Business, which was a $1 billion revenue division and delivered 90% of the profitability for the bank. Building ATB Capital Markets through the acquisition of AltaCorp Capital and integration with corporate finance units to a $300 million per year capital markets business. Jon brings deep experience in providing full cycle financial solutions to the energy and agriculture industries, ranging from M&A, equity capital markets, debt capital markets, derivative, treasury, and credit. He's a member of the board of directors of the Alberta Investment Management Corporation, one of Canada's largest and most diversified institutional investment managers, with $158 billion assets under management.
Wonderful. Thanks, Adam, and thanks, Christina. It's great to have you, Gordon and Jon. So we have about 40 minutes for questions, and then we will jump into Q&A from the panel afterwards. If you have any questions, I encourage you to speak up or type them in the dialogue box down below. If comfortable, please keep your video on. It's always good to put a face to the name. So it's really assuring to see that Pure Life Carbon's mission is to create clean technologies that protect and heal the environment, while really enhancing food production and yield. I think there's a huge market for that, and we need that technology more than ever right now. So with that said, Gordon, how was Pure Life Carbon born? And tell us about the insight or reason as to why the company was started.
And thanks for the opportunity to talk on Pure Life Carbon this morning. So how was Pure Life Carbon born? It's really kind of a fun story. It started with the three original founders, Dan Ronald, Chris Vance, I see Chris is actually on the call this morning, and Ryan Rand, who got together and shared a vision around the need for food security, which was critical from a global perspective, as well as everything clean tech, cleaning up the pollutants that contaminate the water, the soil, and the air. So ultimately, the goal when the three partners came together, almost 6 years ago, was to create clean technologies that protect and heal the environment while enhancing food production and increasing yields. So, part of the technology, and I think it's important to just go back a few more years, Part of the development of the technology went back, over 15 plus years ago to actually Lethbridge College and a doctor by the name of Dr. Nick Savadoff. Now, Dr. Savadoff has been involved for his entire career, so 30 plus years, in the growing medium space. And if you think of greenhouses, which is primarily Pure Life Carbon's focus, growing mediums are simply what fruit and vegetables grow in. So he has been involved in the development and the launch of a number of those growing mediums, including Cocoa Coir, Rockwell, and the one we're probably most familiar with, which is peat moss. But what you're probably not aware of is if you look at all the growing mediums, they create almost 10% of GHG emissions worldwide. So not far behind the oil and gas sector. So Dr. Savadoff's focus was, can we create a growing medium that is more environmentally friendly? So, that became Pure Life's goal, which was to replace all the existing growing mediums, which are harmful to the market, such as peat, and create a growing medium that was actually helpful for the environment.
Very cool. And John, Pure Life Carbon has really 3 divisions, and each has their own independent function. I'm curious, what is the business model and what have you discovered since implementing it?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I guess maybe quickly to build off of Gord's comments, the technology itself, or the growing medium product, is a derivative of bamboo. And so currently the company is sourcing bamboo from China, but we're quickly moving to vertically integrate the supply chain and source out of Mexico. So what happens is the bamboo is it's a very unique product in terms of the ultimate outcome in terms of the charged carbon, but it's also a unique product in the sense that it's a fast growing product. It's effectively a grass. In some cases, some people are saying it grows at almost 12 inches a day. And so it's also readily abundant. So the process is harvesting the bamboo from the forests and actually kind of generating carbon credits from that business. Going through an incineration or a pyrolysis process, which also generates clean energy with the bamboo as the feedstock, and then shipping the ash or the carbon molecules then up into Red Deer, processing that carbon in what I would call a chemical bath. I don't think that's a technical term, but that'd be the finance guy kind of looking over. It looks like a chemical bath to me. And then coming out ultimately with a product that you can grow in. And so there's sort of 2 things about the business model that I think are novel. The first one is just the effectiveness of the growing medium itself. Although I think probably everybody who's been in business understands, and I gotta be careful here, but from my perspective, every company needs a widget, and the widget has to be superior to the other widgets currently in the market. That is that's just a first principle of getting any business sort of off the ground.
Right.
What I think is compelling about Pure Life Carbon, though, isn't just that it's got a compelling widget. Its business model itself is an innovation. And so when I look at, and I've seen thousands and thousands of businesses over the years, why the business model is unique and innovative is that this growing medium has no degradation in performance through time. And so Gord talked about, the University of Lethbridge study. That was 18 years ago. Right. The growing medium has been performing at specification for 18 plus years. And so what that allows Pure Life to do is we're not actually selling a single-use product. We're selling a multi-use product, and we're selling a multi-use product that doesn't degrade in performance. So that turns our business model from a sales model into what we would consider to be a leasing model. And so we effectively rent the dirt or the peat moss or the growing medium to the greenhouses. And then when the grow cycle is complete, we take it back, we put it back into a bath, or we put it back into a recycling or a recharge facility, and then we send it out again. So our business model is to produce about 10 million liters a year out of our Red Deer facility through that supply chain process I spoke about. And then every year we've got a larger fleet or a larger inventory for sale. And so the business just effectively compounds and just spits out massive amounts of free cash flow. So those are anyways, those are probably the two most neat and interesting pieces about Pure Life.
Right. Very neat. And so who would your target customers be then?
So primarily the target customer currently is greenhouses. And so greenhouses, it's, the technical term is controlled environment agriculture. And but greenhouses are absolutely taking off, primarily because it gives the ability to grow food, grocery stores, you name it, full season, and also kind of the ability to kind of drive quality. However, greenhouses as a business, if anybody's been a part of them, they're front end capital intensive, they're high volume and very, very low margin. And so what Pure Life does in respect to the growing medium is we can come in and we can provide assurances over these lease agreements on costs. So the companies have surety of costs, and then the growing medium itself, if used under the right conditions, will actually increase the quality of the greenhouse products or the crop production. So at the end of the day, we are very structurally helping the economics of the greenhouse industry, and will help kind of bring that marginal cost down and bring more food and better food to the grocery stores.
Gotcha. Thanks, John. Gordon, what have you experienced as really the most prominent objection to adopting this technology that you guys have?
There's probably a few, actually, Kyle.
Yeah.
I mean, probably the first thing is, as John alluded, it's very different. It's a very different product. That can be pretty scary for growers, especially as John mentioned, when margins are so fine. So, the technology does work similar to the competition, but it solves a lot of the problems that they never even envisioned, like the reusability of the product. That is not part of their current growing process in terms of, and even focusing on reducing emissions. Knowing the other products are harmful, nobody was really even thinking around those terms until we kind of exposed a product that actually sequesters carbon through its production process. So it's not carbon zero, it's actually carbon net negative, which is quite interesting. And we're in the process of, and actually Chris Vance, who heads our ICO division, our environmental division of the company, is actually in the process of finalizing those protocols. That's created its own challenges. That's a long process. But in terms of our clients, they actually have to look at how they have to change their production. And it also takes quite a while to prove that the product actually works the way we say it is going to work. So we've done over 80 trials across mostly North America and Europe as well. And each of those trials takes about a year or so for the product to mature. So it's 1 to 2 years of trials before you even start to talk to the client about securing revenue. So long process, long sales cycle, anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on the fruit and vegetable. But I think John's comment about the what we call our SaaS solution, but it's a substrate as a solution business model. It's really the first of its kind, hugely beneficial for our clients. But we actually have to package the product a little bit differently. We have to recycle it close to their facility and build those related facilities. So leasing versus buying and throwing away the product, which is what what currently happens with all the other growing mediums, is really changing the way we do business. And if you think about a company that is really revolutionizing a sector, really disrupting a sector, that's a 5 or 10 year process or longer. And we're probably only 5 years in. So I think that's really been the biggest challenges, both on the client side and what we're trying to do to the industry.
Yeah. And speaking of being 5 years in, like yourself and the team have really taken this company from a startup to a scale up in a relatively short period of time. You have highly experienced individuals joining the board. You did a 13 million capital raise with CastX. You built out a 40,000 square foot production facility. I'm curious, like, all these things are successes in my mind. Like, what were the conditions necessary to do this along the way?
Well, as John, I think, started his conversation, proof of product.
Proof of product. Yeah.
Proof of product, commercial viability of the product was critical, and that was a 5-year process. And it started, we had to build everything customized. We had to build customized manufacturing, customized processes, all of which those pieces have been patented, and then ended with massive commercial trials. And we gave millions of dollars away of this product, several millions of dollars of the product just for these 80 plus trials. The second piece, and this is similar to, I think, any startup, and that's getting the right people on the bus. So it starts, second, attracting, building, keeping the right team. And when you're actually in a segment that is disrupting the global market of food production, starting with greenhouses and then into other applications, which we probably can get into a bit more in the Q&A. It takes substantial resources. So, in terms of the conditions, but, when you look at the people and the technology and the timing of the market, and what I mean by that is climate is really just hitting everybody's radar screen now. Yeah. So our timing is almost perfect to provide actually some of the first protocols in the world around agriculture. So Chris has been working for the last 2 years on doing that, and it is probably a 3 to 4 year process, but it is such an amazing story. And I want to clarify a couple of things. We've actually raised over 20 million in
congratulations.
Individual investors, all individual, no VC money, no private equity money, and we've done that through a number of partners. So CastX has helped. John's led that process. Pinnacle has been a key assistance as well. So it's not just CastX; it's many parties coming in. But and that's what's moving us to, obviously a larger $35 million institutional raise, which John and his team will lead. So, I think we've been blown away by our trials and the results. Like, we always thought it was all about creating a product that cost similar but was recyclable, and it also reduces the need for water by 70 or 80%, because it's such a dense product with the hard bamboo as the feedstock. It reduces the need for fertilizer. There isn't the crop loss, which you would experience with other growing mediums, which is amazing. But what we didn't realize is it really significantly enhances the quality of the food. We make a better tomato. We make a tomato that, when you look at the scale of quality for all the products we produce, they are actually better quality. That's probably what really surprised us. And at the end of the day, I think that's probably the most important condition. But, in terms of the timing, the world's focusing, as we know, on carbon reductions, and you could say the 17 UN, sustainable goals. When we did a proposal for ERA and for Prairie Scan and received grant funding, significant funding from Prairie Scan, we actually ticked 14 of the 17 UNESCO goals, which was part of the proposal, which was pretty cool. Which is pretty cool. So those are the key factors, I think.
Thanks, Gordon. Very cool. And a question for both of you: mentorship and being a mentee too. It's an interesting thing, but how has this positively impacted your business and/or your career, and at the speed at which you've been able to really execute your vision?
Do you want me to go first, John, or you?
Go ahead, Gord. I always follow you.
All right. I mean, in my introduction, as Christina pointed out, sort of 30 years financial services. I left financial services about 5 years ago, and really started to focus almost exclusively on life sciences, and including ag tech. And that was really the goal of our company that we founded almost 5 years ago, CastX Ventures. and supporting companies with a global impact. So, you know, I was introduced to Pure Life, I think it was about 4 years ago, actually 4 years ago this August. It's been an amazing journey. And I think I've learned more in the 4 years than I learned in 30 years of financial services. So that was one of the big impactful things. In terms of full disclosure, I invest in Pure Life personally. We invest through Castex, of course. And I'm also a director, as you mentioned, Christina mentioned in the introduction. So it's really just, I've just learned an absolute ton. I've also worked on average about 3 days a week with the company because it's our favorite company. I'll say that publicly. And so that's where I've focused my time. So that's how it's impacted me. It's just been a tremendous learning experience, and right in line with my vision around global impact. So maybe John, over to you.
Yeah, for sure. I could, just because it was Gord that pulled me into Pure Life, and it's super interesting. So I was 20 years with a large financial institution and kind of worked very deeply in capital markets. Spent a lot of time on what I would call the two kind of main issues, which are kind of capital formation and access to capital, and that seems to be kind of a lot of where I spend my time. Gord and I overlap on a number of things. So access to capital for Indigenous communities has actually been a big topic in my life for the last kind of year and a bit, actually last 5+ years. That's super enriching. And I think Gord would share that same comment, experience as we kind of think through just I would say the opportunity set of what Indigenous communities can do to kind of really build Canada. And so, I'm happy to spend a lot of time on that. And then the other impact is, startups and folks kind of looking to access capital markets, trying to understand the difference between some, comments around the retail investors, the venture capital, growth equity, family offices, venture studios. There's a lot of nuance to all those terms. In my mind, there's an IRR attached to every single one of them and terms and conditions. To a lot of folks, they've never experienced that. And so I find myself tapped a lot to do that. And then even back to Pure Life, if you would have asked me 2 years ago on a capital formation basis on how to bootstrap or get a company like this off the ground, I would not have recommended they go this way. And partly it's Gord's comment, because I didn't know it was possible. And the fact that you can actually bootstrap a company, to the tune of $20 million across 400 different individual investors was really surprising to me. And it's really surprising how that got, put together. So I'm learning a lot too.
And so what do you think the biggest thing you've learned on your entrepreneurial journey or your career? Well, if you had to kind of summarize that.
Gord talked about it a little bit. I mean, for me, it's always been talent. Success is always about access to talent and a call on talent. Every time I built a lot of businesses in ATB. I was the guy that fixed everything and turned them profitable, and it all turned on talent. Pure Life Carbon, same thing. We've got an incredibly talented entrepreneur. We got an incredibly talented team that supports him. And that makes or breaks it. And as I look at different businesses and people ask me to help, that's the key criteria for me is, is this the talent that can take the company to the next level, or are they just happy with the way they are? And if they're happy with where they are, great, love it. Like no harm, no foul. But if they want to go to the next level, they need the right people involved.
Yeah. Surrounding yourself with the right people is key for sure. What about you, Gordon? Kind of the biggest thing you've learned on your journey and your career?
Well, I won't go into talent because I would agree with John that that's probably number one. Talent and strategy, and then execution, and of course managing cash flow carefully as a growing enterprise. The other things I've learned, raising capital is really challenging. Like it's really, really difficult, and especially in Canada. In the what I would call the ag tech space, there's very few providers. I mean, Tallgrass and some of these companies that are taking off are very exciting, but they're very much seed investment, like a couple $100,000 here and there. So raising significant capital in the ag space in Canada is really different. difficult, and raising money in Alberta outside of energy is really difficult. The other thing I've learned, and I think this is probably everybody on the call knows that, is everything takes a lot longer than you expect. And it's like, we should have, people said, we're telling the story and we're coming back to people and they say, well, it's, you seem to be moving slower in the capital raise and everything just takes a lot longer. The other, it takes a lot of time, Kyle. And I think there's also a lot of up and downs along the way. And I think, again, that's intuitive, but you really, until you go through a lot of those ups and downs, you don't really know how challenging that can be. And I think at the end of the day, the other learning too, and maybe it's gray hairs, but the other learning is it all comes down to trusted relationships at the end of the day. Even with a startup, like in terms of your network, who
right.
If they trust you, you can move relationships a lot farther along. And I also think that being a mentor has just been a tremendous relationship. I mean, John and I were on the board of YPO Gold together, and we started a mentorship program. And what we've been able to do in mentorships with startups is what you do at Intergen, which is so important. And it's it's fun. Like, I never realized how much fun it was being a mentor, and it's kind of a secret. I don't like to let this leak out too much, but I'm learning more than the mentee is learning. And some of these companies, I'm just learning so much every day from these really talented people. So I think that's what I would say, Kyle, my learnings.
Yeah, totally. There's a plethora of knowledge out there, and there's a lot of people that know a lot of stuff. So it's interesting to kind of open each and every book, right? Pure Life Carbon, question for both of you. What are the plans for expansion, and what's that going to take?
John, why don't you go first this time?
Sure. So, as Gordon kind of mentioned, we are looking to raise about $35 million Canadian to what I call de-risk the business model and prove out just kind of the end-to-end value proposition. Right. Once that's complete, what we have is we've got an intact business model that we can locate around the globe, whether that's Europe, Asia, India, you name it. And it's the combination of the forestry practice, the bamboo forestry, the paralysis, the manufacturing, and the location and agricultural clusters. And so this business model it takes off, and there's kind of a lot of optionality in that. The other sort of comment I'd also have, well, I got one more comment on
please.
About access to capital, but I'll save it for later.
Okay. Thanks, John. Gordon, again, a question for both of you. What kind of help would you need from a group like this? How can we help? I mean, we have a lot of individuals on the call from banking, investment banking, investors, venture capital funds, individuals trying to crack into clean tech as well, and some that are further ahead than others. What kind of help would you need?
Yeah, well, I think, and I noticed one really good question right away in the chat room, which ties into my comments. So let me talk about that. And the question was, why not VC private equity monies right away? And that kind of goes into and John's comment about how surprising it was that we were able to raise over $20 million with just retail investors. So we did. But really now we need to move to the strategic investors. And I use that term intentionally, not just around VC private equity, but companies that are passionate with our story around, global food production enhancement, reducing contaminations, lowering the global footprint, being a carbon negative company. So strategic introductions in that space. So potentially around, potentially VC, sure, absolutely. But also introductions in the ag tech space that we may not have been able to unpack or meet, and even in the carbon space and the ESG space. I think we've navigated the carbon ESG fairly well with Chris's leadership, but we can always benefit by more connections. Like every week I seem to be talking to somebody else in that space. And ultimately, what we're trying to do, from my personal perspective and also Pure Life Carbon, is we're really working to support this new ecosystem of ag tech in Alberta and in Canada, and this new ecosystem around ESG and carbon, and really for us, global sustainable food production. So if you kind of put on that lens, any connections that you might have in that area would be very helpful.
Noted. Awesome. Anna Davidson has a question. Do you want to unmute yourself, Anna, or would you like me to read it?
Hey, sure, I'll unmute.
Perfect, thanks. And it could be for Chris Evans too, or Chris Vance, excuse me.
Yeah, Chris Vance is the one I understand is actually developing these protocols. So he might be the best one to answer, but open to a collaborative answer here. So curious about your carbon credit development approach. I'm director of projects at Guardian Conservation, a carbon credit developer. So this is the world I work in. And we've seen a lot of really interesting, promising projects like this come up. But it's tough, as you know, obviously you've developed these protocols, tough to actually find that roadmap to bring these credits to market. So curious about, if you're open to sharing which registry you're working with for those protocols, and thank you again for paving the way here.
You guys can all hear me?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. I'm Chris Vance. So I'm the sustainability leader for the company and also one of the co-founders. So I go back to the inception. So I've been able to experience all the bobs and weaves and ups and downs and challenging times of a startup business, but grateful to be on this call today to share this with you. So just a little bit of clarity. We're not developing protocols. We are part of a technical working group for a peat avoidance protocol right now, which is getting developed. And that's a collaboration between a bunch of universities and Ducks United and a few other big entities like that. Intact Insurance is sponsoring that. So that's a peat avoidance protocol. So that's about the preservation of particularly Canadian peat lands and wetlands. The other, when John and Gord talked about the vertically integrated value chain that we have, it starts up with forestry. And then within the forestry division, we're sustainably farming bamboo. And that takes a couple of different directions there. We have existing forests. And when I say we have allocation, we have secured a bunch of land down in Mexico. We are yet to start our forestry activities. That's pending our $35 million scaling expansion, but everything is lined up for us to pull the trigger as soon as we get funds in the bank account. So part of that land is existing agroforestry. And in that scenario, we would be using an IFM protocol. And what we've discovered working through the various standard bodies is Climate Action Reserve has a great protocol for IFM that fits really nicely into that that situation down there. For the reforestation and afforestation portion of our upstream division, which is basically planting new bamboo, we're likely to go to a Vera protocol for that.
Okay.
When we move down to our midstream, so we go forestry, midstream is carbonization and pyrolysis. That's where we start our treatment, our specialized formulas. So we take our biomass, then we go through another set of treatment processes before pyrolysis, and then we have our own formula for pyrolysis and circularity that's involved in that. Then from midstream, we go to downstream. So for midstream, we're looking at a few different protocols. There's only a few on the market right now. Vera's got theirs for biochar. Pure Earth is another one, and they're now ICROA accredited. So, we may go that route. Mm-hmm. We haven't pulled the trigger. There's some boundary items that we're looking at within those protocols just to make sure that we fit within the box. Yeah. But the exciting part of all of this is that we have a sustainable supply in the front end, and we have a demand for the product, the end use on the downstream. And that's really what makes us different versus all the other biochar companies out there. They're struggling to actually sell their product, or they don't have a consistent feedstock on the front end.
Right.
So there's a big distinction there between us. And we're not actually making a biochar. We're building a purpose-built carbon. So as Gord mentioned, we do have everything patent protected. We have our secret formula and our secret sauce that really nobody, even if we give you all the ingredients to make the recipe, you still wouldn't be able to figure out how we make our premium product that's used specifically. So our charged carbon product in downstream is only used as a soilless growing medium in controlled environment agriculture. It's not used for soil augment. It's not used for animal feed. That would be a byproduct after pyrolysis. So once we go through pyrolysis, we have a carbon credit opportunity there.
Yeah.
Then we get into downstream. Now, this
Right.
is something that gets really exciting for me right now. And we're working with a couple different consulting groups to figure out the mechanics of this. When we think about the existing space for controlled environment agriculture, growers really only have three choices. They have coco coir, peat moss, and rockwool. As previously noted, they all have their own sustainability issues. Peat moss being the biggest, which also makes up 70% of the market. Peatland degradation as a whole collectively is around 5% of total GHG. That's not just peat for greenhouses. That's just as a whole. So
okay.
maybe it's 1 to 2%, but it's still a big number, right? So what we're looking at there, and that's why we're part of that technical group, working group, is we're looking at an avoidance scope 3 asset for our downstream users. Now that could be our growers, but then that could also be the grocer or the final purchaser of the produce.
Right.
Because by switching to our product, because they really only have three choices outside of ours, they're actually doing an avoided emissions. So we're working on the mechanics of that. We think there's definitely something there from a carbon footprint perspective. Now, whether or not we can monetize that, we're working on that development of that opportunity right now. So that's pretty exciting. I would consider ourselves as partners in performance and growth for our clients. And, the biggest problem that they experience is single digit margins. It's really the economics. And so when we can come in and provide these additional layers of support on sustainability, on the mechanics of the greenhouse and how they grow, that really elevates the relationship and the opportunity that we have.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining it like that, Chris. I can envision it more fully now. So that makes sense to me. Anna, did that address your question?
Absolutely. Chris, I've also sent you a LinkedIn connect message, so maybe we can chat more offline.
Yeah. One thing I will say just to finish up, and I forgot to say this.
Yeah.
Trying to map bamboo from a carbon perspective is incredibly difficult. We've been working on a calculator for the last year with our consultants.
Chris, can you explain why it's difficult?
There's 1,500 species of bamboo. If you take Guadua angustifolio and plant it in Mexico, and then you take the same species and plant it in China, they grow differently.
Yeah.
Some grow like this, some grow like that. They grow incredibly high or not. And they regenerate at
so just so many variations,
undefined rates. Like you can have like one of the rhizomes under here that has all these fingers, and you harvest the tree. Well, a bunch of those fingers could turn into additional stems or bamboo poles. One of them could turn into them, or all 8 could turn into them. That's a challenging thing to try to project forward. So it becomes incredibly difficult to develop the mechanics of the boundaries of how you're going to actually analyze the carbon opportunity down there. So there's really only one other company that's done it before, and we'll come in there and be the second that's going to be able to monetize a forestry bamboo projects.
Wow. So you're ahead of the curve.
Well, I wanted to pick up on one comment that Chris alluded to, and that's even biochar, because that's another link in the, in the questions. So I can probably deal with that really quickly. Yeah. So we often are, people often say, hey, you're a biochar, but a biochar is really anything that's created through the pyrolysis, the carbonation process, where they use biomass to create, basically green energies, or anything that comes out of pyrolysis is a biochar. Now, the interesting thing about biochars is you cannot grow, a product like a fruit or vegetables in 100% biochar. And that is why we've created a different product that is not a biochar. It's specifically using bamboo, as we've talked about that process. And what comes out of it is you can grow 100% in our product. And when we went to National Research Council in Vegreville, and they said that's impossible. That is not scientifically possible. So they ignored us for about a year, and then they went over to visit one of our clients that's been growing in our product for 26 growing cycles in Edmonton in a greenhouse. So, peat moss, rock wool, cocoa coir, any kind of mixed with biochars, any wood fibers, you have to dispose of that every time you finish growing, a tomato plant or lettuce. We're in our 26 growing cycle with this one company, and our friends in Vegreville at the ag part of the National Research Council said, I guess you can. And so they became our partners. So about 3 or 4 years ago, they stepped on board. They've been doing a lot of white papers for us, and they've said, oh, I guess you guys have figured it out. But I wanted to point out that we are different from a biochar, and we don't even call ourselves biochar. I would owe my CEO, Ryan Rand, about $20 right now because we charge our own internal people if they use the word biochar. Not that biochar is bad, but it's just not the best growing medium. Whereas we've scientifically achieved that massive hurdle to create a product that you can grow 100% in. And this is the first time we've mentioned it. It is totally sterile. Right. So, the Rockwell had the monopoly on sterile growing mediums for greenhouses. The problem with their product is it's created synthetically through mining, and it has a high level of natural asbestos. So not only is it really hard to handle, but the landfills are banning the disposal of it, and it's creating a huge global issue. And so you can imagine we come in with an all natural product with none of those issues that's recyclable. Right. So John's gonna kick me in the butt because I've mentioned recyclable about 10 times now as well. But that's probably the key part of our whole story.
John, you have anything to add to that point?
Good.
Do we have any other questions from the panel? Feel free to unmute yourself and give it a shot or type it in the box. I just don't want to leave anyone out here. We have about another 5 or so minutes.
Maybe as people form their questions, maybe just add a comment about the capital, and Gord was kind of talking about agri-tech capital in Canada.
Right.
I could tell a story about how the Canadian Wheat Board, my dad was a Canadian Wheat Board farmer, has racked agriculture in Canada. And the story is this, is we didn't create in agriculture entrepreneurs because what our farmers did, what my father did, is he just produced a great crop and he took it into the silo in town and then drove away. He had no understanding of what happened in the value chain. He had no understanding where that crop ultimately went to. And he had no understanding what ultimately the needs of his customers were. And so it's actually only this round or this generation of farmers and growers, I believe, that are actually had the business acumen to start creating some of these value-added products or kind of show up in the marketplace with way more business acumen than my dad did. I love my dad, but he just it is one of the challenges that we've had effectively as an industry. Right. I provided financing to the agriculture industry for years and years and years. And my comment was always, Canada has got this really weird situation where you have massive number of agriculture producers, and you got Cargill and Nutrient on the other side, and there's absolutely nothing in the middle. Pure Life is part of that. Pure Life is part of that value-added agriculture strategy for Canada. It's part of that. Interesting with Chris and Ryan Rand. I mean, it's the intersection of kind of oil field services meets agriculture meets value-added opportunities. And this is we are building. We are building a value-added sector here. What isn't in play, though, again, I'm not going to blame the Wheat Board on this. I'll blame the Canadian financial institutions, of which I was part of. We don't have good financial vehicles to also support these sectors as we move forward. And so, where I would have made a great career out of capital formation in the oil and gas industry, and the ability to kind of deploy capital, create value, drive, generate IRRs on that capital investment, and then create that opportunity to kind of reinvest moving forward. We did some great business in the cannabis industry around that. It's not ending. It's exactly where it's supposed to be right now as an industry, but we created a lot of wealth and we created a lot of businesses. What we haven't done in technology in Alberta and what we haven't done in agriculture in Alberta yet is, kind of cycle that capital, create those winners, and then kind of generate that ability to kind of put capital to work. And Gord's with CATEC is trying to do it with life sciences. Where Pure Life is on the corporate side in terms of the consumption. But I just want to put that comment out there because I actually think that's also a big reason why we're all on this call here today. One, about learning about a great company, a great entrepreneurial story that sits in our backyard. Two, learning about what our role in that financial ecosystem and in that industry ecosystem as we sort of move forward. And so, anyways, I just want to. There's lots of names on this call that I recognize, so I want to thank each of you for being here and being a part of that, as well as thinking through like what we can do better. And again, not to blame the Canadian financial institutions because they do play a role, but they play a role in a later stage company. It's the early stage companies that we have a challenge with.
Right.
John, I may jump in there.
Yeah,
just
please.
Given the representation of a Canadian financial institution today. The reality is you're very right. Like the truth of the matter is in this early stage, it is difficult until the companies start generating revenue, right? It is to a point where it's not even when they're at the growth equity stage, they really have to be somewhere between pilot and potentially like true commercialization where you can kind of see the Canadian financial institutions come in. That's not solely in Canada, that's globally. This is the same situation because the risk management within a bank is very, and you'd be very familiar with this, the necessary levels of risk management are in place. And this is where you're seeing government step in, right? So you have the Loans Program Office in the US, which is now being funded to an extraordinary level to really fund first of a kind projects, second, third, fourth of a kind is what they're kind of stating. They're very inflexible capital though, relative to what we're seeing with what some of the Canadian programs are kind of looking to provide. So when it's bigger infrastructure, you've got CIB, who's coming in, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and now sort of Canada's answer to the IRA has been this, the Canada Growth Fund. It's just kicking off. It's just coming into fruition today, but they do see themselves as strategic investors and strategic capital as well, with their investment being less returns focused and more impact focused and having the multiplier effect be for the Canadian economy. So, I think Canada's trying to come up with answers to sort of help spur what's really necessary within the decarbonization space. And it is hard for banks with traditional risk and adjudication in place to really fill that gap when there still is risk around the revenue line and having these loans repaid, right? Without sort of the government support as some form of a support agreement or a backstop.
Christine, I love that answer. And I would say one more step. So yes, 100%. Banks have to play their role and they have to generate their returns on capital. My comment would be that I would love to see access to capital in Alberta, in Western Canada, that has nothing to do with the government. Free market capital that basically trades on the fundamental merits of the companies. And free market capital that kind of bootstraps us and grows forward. I know where I know where the government wants to step in. And don't get me wrong, Pure Life has benefited tremendously from some of that government support. It probably wouldn't be around. I just don't believe government is the right source of capital, the good source of capital to create the free market economy that we're trying to deliver on. And so my challenge is a little bit, I hope that's Brian Fleske on that call note, because the challenge is a little bit about us trying to find a model that's not government and that's not financial institution.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you are in the same position as many others in this respect, and it is that capital may be there, but then at the same time, no one wants to pay for what the cost of that capital ultimately is, right? So there is a Venn diagram here that is difficult to sort of find the right intersection to.
Yeah, if I could just add, Kyle.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, John, Chris, Gord, big kudos to you guys. Your perseverance and tenacity is incredible. And the fact that you raised $20 million from private investors is an incredible achievement. And we wish you well on your next evolution of $30 million. Two questions. One, because the core of Intergen is on the mentor stuff, at some point in time, if you could tell us how you've benefited from mentorship and advisors from people to elevate your performance, that would be helpful. And two, there's all kinds of funds, as John was referring to, like 51 Food and Ag Tech Growth Fund and Emmer Tech and so forth. I'm sure you have, but thought about a synergistic institutional investor, such as Carlyle or Agrium. They're both, of course, forever looking to broaden their good citizenship profile in no carbon and low carbon endeavors. And do you think there would be any appetite there, and have you explored that?
Well, John, why don't I take the first part, which is the mentorship, and you take the second part of Brian's question, which is the capital. And just to expand a little bit more on the mentorship, and I think that, Brian, is so critical, and that's what, of course, Intergen is all about. And
right.
And I'm a huge believer of that in every professional within large organizations. But what we have to do is and this is what Intergen is doing, is do the same thing that large institutions like the national banks and the ATBs of the world do intentionally around mentorships for young professionals, but do that with startups. So how can we intentionally create mentorship? What we try to do at Pure Life Carbon is we built an advisory board and a board very quickly, but with being an active board. Like, I'm a board member, but I mentioned I spend 3 days a week with the company, and I mentor the leadership as best I can. And the external board members, through your normal governance and skills matrix, and using all the learnings from the ICD programs and everything else. We have a former premier of Canada on the board in terms of some of the governance and mentorship. We have one of the leaders of the Pathways Alliance, Maria Rajic, on the board for a lot of the climate and the ESG and even the Alberta government connections, and Chris Patterson from an ag tech background. And we brought in people like Jon Horsman. And one of the goals of bringing John was, it wasn't initially to be the CFO. It was initially to mentor us and to really help us in mentoring the company and share his 20 plus years of working with thousands of companies in all stages of startup and scale up. And so then John became passionate with the story and self-identify that, hey, I want to be part of this story. But that was initially mentorship. We were bringing in a lot of those people. That was a key part of my role, to bring in a lot of these external people and see how they want to help. But at a minimum, they were mentoring us. So it was informal mentorship. And I think that's critical. So, John, why don't I hand it over to you on everything?
Well, just before I does that, Gord, sure. That's a great billboard. We really appreciate that profile. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. And that's true. I would suggest what's interesting from my role here at Pure Life is the ability to kind of see around the corner. I've got a sense of what the next step is and what the next stage is for this company, and whether the folks know it or not, I'm kind of building the foundation. So when that happens, it doesn't feel like a wrecking ball, but it feels like a good step up into the next the next stage. On the capital strategy, yeah, Brian, 100%. We are talking with all the Canadian funds in this space, getting to know them, getting to understand them. We like any good company that's raising capital, we've got a CRM, and so we're cataloging every call and taking notes and really trying to deep dive and understand where their investment thesis is, and then kind of how we fit. And many times, I think, to be fair, it's either we're too early or too late, because they sit at different stages of the capital cycle. And with the strategic investors like the Agriums and the Cargills and what have you, same type of conversations, same kind of deep understanding of trying to understand where they want to go to work and why. And but as Gord said, capital raising is difficult. And I feel confident. I've seen enough companies over time that good companies can raise in bad cycles and in good cycles. It's really just a function of valuation. Average companies tend to fall away in bad cycles, and obviously marginal companies just don't make it even in good cycles sometimes. And so I'm not too fussed about the capital raising side of it, and we've got a robust program underway. But it takes discipline and it takes a lot of perseverance.
Yeah, well, good on you, and we wish you well. And if anything we can do with our little team, mighty little team, we're there for you.
Thank you.
So thanks so much, and thanks for the question, Brian, and thank you to the panel for the questions. John, Gordon, Chris, thanks for those answers and explaining what you guys do, and it was just fantastic to hear about all of that. I think what you're doing is hugely important. I think you're ahead of the wave, and when you're ahead of the wave, big returns can happen. So kudos to you. I want to thank our sponsors, Top 7 over 7, RBC, Synovus, Sandstone Asset Management, Prairies Can, and CED. Thank you so much. And that concludes our Clean Tech Breakfast Club series. Thank you everyone for joining, and please don't forget to join us on our next Power Play series. It's Coaching Today's Leaders, and that's going to be with Jason Krause, who's the founder of Level 52, and it will be on August 23rd. So thank you, everybody, and until next time, take care.
Yeah, and best wishes. Congratulations for your tenacity.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Kyle and team.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye.